So this is the second movie about references. This is about absolute references. And this is just as, if not more important than the prior movie on relative references. We're going to talk about absolute references, explain what they are, and then we're going to talk about mixed references, and we'll give two examples of applying mixed references. So absolute references. I mentioned in the introduction that absolute references are probably as important or more important than relative references, and I think that's true. And if you understand absolute references, you're probably going to understand relative references as well. So getting this concept down will really help you build a solid skill set when you're working with Excel. So you may have been wondering in the last movie, I kept talking about relative references. What makes it a relative reference as opposed to a different type of reference? Well, I'm going to show you what the distinction is and how you define this to be an absolute reference, because right now it's not. It's a relative reference. We have a formula that multiplies B9, the cell to the left, times C7, two cells above. So if I copy this formula down, I get, relatively speaking, the exact same result. I multiply the cell to the left times two cells above. But for the purpose of this schedule, where I'm trying to find what is 5% of all these sales amounts that's in column B and column E, that obviously is not going to work. So what I need to do is make the reference to C7 an absolute reference. So wherever I copy this formula, that formula is going to reference cell C7. Doesn't matter where the formula is. And the way we do that is we put a dollar sign in front of the C and in front of the 7. So I'm going to put a dollar sign there and a dollar sign there. We have now made this an absolute reference, and that is the answer to the question of what makes it a relative reference. Well, a relative reference is determined by the lack of these dollar signs. So I'm going to control enter, and of course that's the right number. It's 5% of 100. But the real test is to copy this down, which I can double click and use autofill to do that. And then I can control C, go over 3 columns and enter, and we get the right number across the board. And wherever this formula is, it's referencing the cell to the left times cell C7, or the content that's in cell C7. So that's an absolute reference. I've got another table down here that is sort of a similar situation. I have sales amounts, but I have 3 tax rates. The formula that's in C23, again, contains 2 relative references. If I copy this formula somewhere, I'm going to get a wrong answer in every other place in this schedule that I'm trying to build other than where that formula currently is. So how do I fix that? Well, I know when I move this formula around, what I want to do is multiply the sales that's in column B times the tax rate that's in row 21. So going on that sort of logic, we can make what's called a mixed reference. And the way we do that is we select the reference, in this case it's B23, and press F4 the number of times required to make B an absolute reference and to make the 23 part a relative reference. And that's called a mixed reference. And using the F4 key is the quickest way to make these references either relative or absolute. When I press F4 once, I make an absolute reference for B and 23. Once again, I make an absolute reference to 23, a relative to B. Once again, that's what I want, because I want the sales that's in column B to be multiplied the tax rate, F4, that's in row 21. Control enter. And of course, we get the right answer here, but that's not the real test. The real test is to copy this formula in the entire area. And this is what I was talking about or referring to in the introduction. If you can build a single formula that generates a correct result so that you can copy that formula in a number of different cells, you greatly eliminate a lot of manual work when you're constructing a spreadsheet. So is this the right answer? Well, An easy way to check, and this is the way I do it, is I use the F2 key because I can visually see that those are the two right cells that I want to multiply together, and I can go down and select this one. Those are the two correct cells. That's the correct two cells. And having gone that far, since the formula is exactly the same in every single one of these cells that has a result, I can trust in the rest of the numbers here. I don't have to check mathematically every single one of them. Of course, some of them you can visually check. 7% of 200 is obviously 14. So we're going to do this one more time. What I have here is a standard multiplication table. And once again, if I were to manually fill the schedule out by building formulas, each one of them custom made for each one of these cells, I'd have to build 100 formulas. But we just learned we don't have to do that. I'm going to press F2, select H, 9, the first reference, and applying the same logic, since I want to multiply the number that's in column H, I'm going to make column H an absolute reference and leave 9 to float as a relative reference, a mixed reference. Using F4, 1, 2, 3, that makes H absolute, the 9 is relative, and since I want to multiply that number with the number that's in row 8, I'm going to make 8 the absolute reference and leave I to float. Control Enter. Once again, that's correct, but that's not the hard part. We're going to copy this over the entire region and enter, and we can visually see that the numbers are correct. So that's absolute references. Absolute references is an integral part of learning Excel so that you can build some dynamic spreadsheets and ease the work of constructing formulas. There are times when absolute references work. There are other times when you need a mixed reference. A mixed reference is where either the column or row reference is fixed.